Everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. We are in Taipei right now, working on a factory tour series, and we actually have a point for you to comment on regarding that. But for the news recap, we'll be talking about YouTube reviewing its human malware demonetization policies, but it hasn't reviewed them yet, so I still can't say the word. And AMD's Financial Analyst Day for 2020 was packed with a lot of information we'll need to go over. Intel's got some news coming up for a new test site in Costa Rica that's been certified, and it also has some commentary on process leadership and its inability to regain leadership for a couple of years. And then we'll be covering the El Capitan supercomputer and some Ampere 80-core server chips. Before that, this video is brought to you by Corsair's Hydro X water cooling series. Corsair's strength is bringing water cooling to the masses, and it has built out cooling solutions with industry leaders to help newcomers get into open loop cooling. Corsair has fittings, adapters, GPU water blocks, CPU water blocks, pump res combos, and radiators, all available in the Hydro X line. As you can see in our footage, these kits can be used to build beautiful open loop systems. Learn more at the link in the description below. All right, so for the first one, we're going to be visiting with a lot of people. I noted this in the Ask GM that's coming up as well, but basically we'd like you to leave comments in the comment section below for any questions you might have that we could pose to Kingpin or HighCookie, who are both professional overclockers. Kingpin works for EVGA, HighCookie works for Gigabyte, and we're going to be spending time in each of their labs working with them on just some coverage in general, but potentially some overclocking too. So it's a good option or opportunity for you to post any more advanced overclocking questions that you might have that we wouldn't be able to answer quite as well as the professionals in the space. So anything from what's it like to work as an overclocker professionally to technical specific questions about, say, voltages and stuff like that. So leave your questions below. We're going to look here and in the Ask GN for anything that might be interesting for basically an Ask the Overclocker segment we'll be doing this trip. Next news item, YouTube is reviewing its human malware demonetization, and we still can't say the words like CV or anything related to it because right now it's demonetizing videos for reference of the thing, and that's because a couple things. So first of all, it's in the title, you get flagged immediately, and if you say it verbally, YouTube has a really cool transcript automation procedure, except that does mean that it'll scan and find words, so it can find things like swear words, and you can get partial demonetization, or it can find things like sensitive topics, which is currently what the human malware is identified as. YouTube tweeted, and ironically, I can't read the full tweet because we would get demonetized, and we did talk about bleeping it, but then we would get flagged for swearing because YouTube sees bleeps as swearing, and then you get partial demonetization. But anyway, the tweet said, quote, "To protect people from misinformation, we're removing videos that violate the policies, discourage people from seeking medical treatment, or encourage the use of harmful cures to treat the thing." And it also, they had another tweet that says, quote, "Given the rapidly updating news and education on human malware, we are reviewing our monetization policies around videos that discuss the virus. More to come." And then they said, "Lastly, we are donating advertising space to @WHO and local government authorities in impacted regions to help educate and inform their communities." End of quote for that. So that's the update on YouTube's policies. They haven't rolled it out yet, but presumably when they do, we can stop doing stupid workarounds. Next one, AMD Financial Analyst Day 2020 for Zen 3, Zen 4, and Navi 2X news that came out. AMD just finished holding its AMD Financial Analyst Day, where it outlined several developments on the horizon. There's a lot of information here, so we're going to unpack as much of it as we can, as efficiently as we can, and it may be worth revisiting some of these topics individually in more depth as more information comes out. But for now, we'll just recap it quickly for you. A lot of the information we've seen before, some of it though is new, and then there's also been some updates and modifications to information that AMD has put out previously on its public roadmaps. First item, AMD noted that it has shipped more than 260 million x86 Zen cores since the launch of Zen in 2017, and according to AMD, that rate is apparently doubling. They also said Zen 3 will begin rollout in late 2020, with the full product stack for that being available by end of 2021. And while we and everyone else previously thought that Zen 3 would be a 7 nanometer plus node by TSMC, AMD seems to be walking that back, that expectation, dropping the plus designation from its most recent roadmaps. AMD clarified that while Zen 3 will use enhancements beyond Vanilla's 7 nanometer, it didn't say Zen 3 won't use EUV, but that it will instead vary case by case. So we'll learn more about which cases those are as things approach. As a reminder, TSMC currently has 2 process nodes beyond its first generation N7. There's the N7P, which is DUV based. N7P is mostly an optimized continuation of N7 that recycles the same design rules and tools as N7, so it's IP compatible. Then there's also N7 Plus, which is TSMC's first process that adapts EUV for certain layers, and we're sure to learn more about this in the future as well. Next, AMD is currently developing its Zen 4 architecture, and it's targeting a 2022 release for that. The Zen 4 cores will apparently be built on 5 nanometer, so that'll be a change as well. EPYC Milan is the successor to EPYC Rome, the currently deployed newest EPYC CPUs, and it's on track for a late 2020 launch as well, and of course the desktop parts typically roughly coincide with those server launches. Milan will use the Zen 3 architecture and use an improved iteration of 7 nanometer, whether that's TSMC's N7P or N7 Plus remains to be seen at this point. Further out is Genoa, which we've briefly mentioned in AMD's El Capitan supercomputer news coming up later. EPYC Genoa will be based on Zen 4, and that one has a much later release date, expected 5 nanometer for a 2022 launch on that one. AMD also had news on Infiniti Fabric interconnects now being known as Infiniti Architecture rather than Infiniti Fabric. They're leaning further into it, and that begins with the 3rd generation of the technology. AMD previously announced that El Capitan will use the 3rd gen Infiniti Architecture and touts an increased CPU to GPU memory coherency. Other than a rough 2022 launch date, though, nothing more is really known at this time about the updates to Infiniti Fabric and the rebranding as Infiniti Architecture. AMD is also splitting its GPU architectures into a few pieces. So RDNA is going to remain as the consumer line. That was the semi-replacement for GCN. AMD made a big point when RDNA came out that GCN would still be alive, although when they said that, it kind of felt like they were just trying to reassure people who had maybe recently purchased professional class cards that it wasn't a dead purchase. But RDNA is remaining for client, and then they have another one called CDNA for compute and data center customers. As for how CDNA will differentiate from RDNA and its gaming-focused deployment, we're not sure yet. AMD hasn't specified, but at least the designations are known at this point. AMD shared a roadmap outlining the 2 generations of CDNA. CDNA 1 is supposed to be 7 nanometer, and CDNA 2 is supposed to be on an unspecified node for, again, 2022, maybe 5. We know that CDNA 2 will rely heavily on 3rd gen Infiniti architecture, which was just announced, and no doubt El Capitan is set to use CDNA 2 as well. A couple more items, 2 more from AMD. This is a big analyst day for them. Navi 2X seems to be what AMD is targeting for its Big Navi chip that's been discussed for a while. We know that Big Navi is a thing. Lisa Su talked about it quite a while ago at this point, but there's also been a lot of BS rumors out there, some of which we've covered. SK Hynix recently debunked one of them officially. Anyway, Navi 2X will be based on RDNA 2. According to AMD, RDNA 2 will bring up to a 50% performance per watt improvement. To be extremely clear here, that doesn't necessarily translate to a 50% improvement in rasterization performance. For example, 50% performance per watt means that you have an efficiency increase, but not, and probably a performance increase, but not necessarily a straight 50% improvement in what we perceive as performance, which would typically be illustrated as maybe FPS or render time or something like that. Instead, you're looking at what performance do you get at a given power consumption. So this improvement will extend further with RDNA 3 set for 2022. RDNA 2 based GPUs are expected for later this year. And then the final item from AMD is that they also unveiled what appears to be a response to Intel's Foveros technology in the form of what AMD calls X3D die stacking. Intel's Foveros was also making a big deal out of die stacking, multiple dies. Seems to be the way of the future rather than monolithic solutions. AMD is framing X3D die stacking and packaging as a natural evolution from its past MCM and chiplet designs, seeing AMD stack multiple dies atop a single interposer. Exactly what dies and elements AMD plans to incorporate here aren't known yet. However, AMD is promising a 10x increase in the bandwidth density, apparently, and we'll learn more about that later. Intel certifies a Costa Rica site for testing and finishing operations for its CPUs. In a recent product change notification, or PCN, Intel puts these out regularly for existing products. The company revealed that it's preparing to bring a fourth site online for test and finish, which is part of its processor manufacturing operations, and that's going to be online in Costa Rica. The additional site should help ease Intel's manufacturing woes and ability to meet demand, however low it may at times be. And for the meantime, it's targeting Cascade Lake SP and Cascade Lake R Xeon chips specifically. The PCN states that Costa Rica's operations will roll out in phases starting April 19th of 2020. The remaining operations should come online by August 3rd of 2020. So you might see some easing of some of the supply constraints by then, at least for Xeon parts. Another Intel news item on this one. Intel noted itself that it won't regain process leadership until post-2021. Recently at the Morgan Stanley Analyst Conference, Intel CFO George Davis offered some exceedingly rare introspection on behalf of Intel. Most notably, Davis laid bare that despite the fact that Intel is currently shipping 10 nanometer in the form of Ice Lake Y, U, and Agilex FPGAs, the 10 nanometer node simply won't be as productive or as profitable as 14 nanometer. And it certainly won't match the iconic 22 nanometer that spit out Haswell and Ivy Bridge. The quote was, look, this just isn't going to be the best node that Intel has ever made. It's going to be less productive than 14, less productive than 22. The fact is, like I said, it isn't going to be as strong a node as people would expect from 14 or what they'll see in 7. That was by George Davis from Intel. Davis also affirmed that Intel is firmly behind its manufacturing competitors in process technology and process leadership. TSMC, biggest competitor right now in the processor space at least, is currently at 7 nanometers and moving forward with 7 nanometer plus EUV, which has been discussed for, it feels like decades at this point, but is finally happening. And we have, if you're interested in EUV and what that is, we have a video with David Cantor from a couple of years ago, a technical analyst who's very good in this industry, explaining more of what that is. So it's expected that Intel's 10 nanometer will match TSMC's 7 nanometer non-EUV in terms of transistor density. And when Intel launches its own 7 nanometer EUV based node by end of 2021, Davis predicts that only then will Intel reach parity with the competition, who will of course also be advancing at the same time. However, Intel isn't expected to recapture a process lead until some unspecified point beyond 2021. The quote continues, so we bring a lot of capability to the table for our customers in addition to the CPU, and we feel like we're starting to see the acceleration on the process that we've been talking about to get back to. You know, parity in the 7 nanometer generation and regain leadership in the 5 nanometer generation. So Intel at this point hasn't explicitly stated when it expects 5 nanometer will arrive. However, Intel has expressed a desire to get back to a 2-year manufacturing cadence, which could land the new node in late 2023, although 2024 may be more likely. And again, Anantech has a full transcription from the conference if you're interested in reading the whole thing and the rest of the quotes. A couple more news items here. El Capitan supercomputer to use AMD's EPYC Genoa and Radeon Instinct. AMD and Cray, now owned by HPE, will partner together with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory to build the El Capitan supercomputer, which is expected to be the world's fastest supercomputer upon completion in 2023. The supercomputer will exceed 2 exaflops of double precision floating point operational power, or FP64. El Capitan marks the second exascale level supercomputer that features both AMD CPUs and GPUs. The first one, if you recall, we covered when it was news also, and that was Frontier. And El Capitan will feature AMD's 4th generation EPYC chips, codenamed Genoa, and based on Zen 4 cores. Additionally, AMD will provide next generation, as they call it, Radeon Instinct GPUs, and the supercomputer will be based on Cray's Shasta platform, which is a tried and true platform at the exascale level that's been out for a little bit. El Capitan will also use Cray's Slingshot interconnect. Each blade in the supercomputer will run a 4-to-1 configuration with 4 GPUs connected to 1 CPU, and AMD's 3rd generation Infiniti architecture, Infiniti Fabric is now called Infiniti Architecture, is also going to be in deployment. El Capitan will replace Sierra and will primarily be used for nuclear weapons modeling. We're looking forward to the future NCC-1703-B Constitution class supercomputer. Ampere Computing officially unveils 80-core Ultra server chips. Last December, we mentioned that Ampere Computing was starting to ramp up and prep an 80-core server chip and was looking to compete most directly with Amazon. Based on ARM's N1 architecture for this one, at the time, the chip was codenamed Quicksilver and would primarily compete against Amazon's own homebrewed ARM server chip, the Graviton 2, which we always liked Anantech's branding of this one as the anti-Graviton or anti-Grav chip. Now Ampere has officially unwrapped Ultra. We don't have an official list of SKUs or prices at this time, but we have some basics on it. We know that Ultra will scale up to 80 cores, and we know that all cores will be single-threaded per the N1 architecture and will be isolated from core sharing security vulnerabilities. Ultra is built on TSMC's N7 process and is rated for a 3 GHz all-core frequency. Ultra will also boast 8 channels for DDR4 3200 memory, 128 PCIe Gen 4 lanes, and has a TDP that's varying between 45 and 210 watts for its various SKUs. Ultra will roll out 2 reference designs. There's one called Mount Snow and one called Mount Jade. Mount Snow is a single socket configuration. Mount Jade is a dual socket configuration. Either design can be had in 1U or 2U form factors, and additionally, each design will offer support for 16 memory modules per socket and come replete with PCIe Gen 4 and CCIX attachments. Ultra is currently being sampled with Ampere's early customers and is slated for volume production mid-2020. And then looks like we've got 2 more here. Recent Windows updates. So there's a recent Windows update, specifically Windows 10, marked KB4535996. That's seen reports of multiple issues despite Microsoft having not yet officially acknowledged any of those issues at time of filming. As is often the case, the KB update was set to fix bugs, including one where the search box was not rendering properly in Windows. Alas, Windows updates often cut both ways, and this one's caused some new issues. As reported by Windows Latest and several users online, the sign tool has been crashing after installing the update. Additionally, Redditors are reporting FPS drops in games as well as audio issues, and that's all post KB4535996. Some users are also reporting that boot times have tanked for them or that their PCs have been hanging in an infinite boot loop. Really good QC on this one. For now, the best course is to avoid the patch. It is an optional patch, which means that you haven't had it automatically applied yet. If you went and manually applied it, then you can remove it by going to Settings, Update History, and then you can uninstall that specific KB number. Finally, Seasonic brings Computex 2018 concepts to market. Finally, it's always come out at a bit of a latency. Seasonic appears to be bringing its 2018 concept, now known as SSR-750FA, to market, and that's a Connect, SSR-750FA Connect solution. The name is different. Originally, it was called the System Cable Management Device, or SCMD. The idea remains the same, though. The Seasonic Connect essentially trades the modular connections on the power supply itself, instead for a single unit that attaches via magnet to the backside of your case's motherboard tray, or more suitably perhaps into the now somewhat popularized cable management channels that come in cases like NZXTs, although we don't know if it'll explicitly fit in that one. All the components of power supply connections are made through this hub instead, with shorter modular cables rather than coming out of the power supply. The difference here from cable extensions is not much. The hub is powered and tethered to the power supply via 2 bundled cables, and then the power supply itself is Seasonic's 750 watt prime model, 80 plus gold certified. The company hasn't mentioned what the Connect will cost, but it did mention that time to market is varying depending on location. Now, a couple of obvious things here. Compatibility with cases on something like this is going to be all over the place and probably not great for a lot of them. You are adding a very large attachment to the back, so you're going to have clearance issues with the panel and then also issues with routing the cables. It would be interesting for cable management channels if it fits in them. Another concern too that we'd have to look into would be the power capabilities of the single cable that's connecting the module to the power supply. You need some pretty thick wire gauge there to prevent any issues when it's under full load. But something interesting, at least different in the industry. Kind of skeptical of how widespread it'll be, though. It's compatibility is going to be the biggest problem, and that has the most chance to kill a product when it comes out. So that's it for this one. Remember to leave your questions below for any of the overclockers or maybe factories that we're visiting this week. We'll try to skim through them and see which ones we can address for with the professionals we meet with. And otherwise, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. And we'll see you all next time.